comment I made earlier, train robbery in Arizona, there were 14 of them during the territorial era. There was 4 more after the territorial era. One of them was successful. Basically, the guys got away with it. That was the one in Navajo Springs. They typically, and just so you get an idea, they rarely robbed, almost never robbed the passengers. It happened once. The Woodson brothers, when they robbed the Maricopa line in 1910, actually went through with guns drawn and robbed the passengers. Every other time, they just get the express car. The money was in the express car, was the best thing to get. What they would do is get the train at the station and basically get the conductor to come out and cut it off right behind the express car, drive it out about 2 miles or so, and then open up the express car and blow the safe. There's all the money. There's usually 2 safes in an express car. There was the through safe, which was going from the original destination back east to California or vice versa, and then there was local safe, which they would open at every stop to exchange money and stuff like that. So the through safe was actually harder to open up. It was a really heavy duty safe. And right before this robbery happened, Wells Fargo improved their safes. And so it's and this is why this robbery is really kind of memorable as far as the many robberies they had in Arizona. There is another Willcox robbery, which would happen in Wyoming, because there's a Willcox, Wyoming. And it was done by Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid in 1899. The most famous one, you probably saw it in the movie where they blow the entire car up. That actually, this is a picture of it, they really did. This, however, was not as bad as the Willcox, Arizona robbery. And so, without further ado, I'll get started. There you go. Okay. So this is the beautiful town of Willcox, Arizona, and there's one of the nice place. It was one of the, at one point it was the biggest commercial cattle shipping points in America. In fact, it was the biggest. It was pretty much on a railroad line, right on the Southern Pacific, which is the main train coming through the southern part of Arizona. Okay. So the robbery itself happens on January 30th, 1895, and it's the westbound Southern Pacific number 20. It became immediately apparent to everybody involved, everybody who was there, that the bandits used way too much dynamite. There's a little bit of a debate how many times they tried to blow the safe up. Some say they did it. One report said they tried 6 times. Another one said they did it by the 4th time. They just kept loading dynamite on it, boom, they go back in, safe, the store was still hanging on there. So they decided, when they're in the express car, they come across some bags of what they call Dobie dollars. They were Mexican silver dollars. Now they weren't interested in these because that's a lot of heavy bags to carry. They're gonna weigh down their horses. So what they finally decided to do was take the dynamite, put it on top of the safe, and put the Dobie dollars on top of it to force the glass downward and blow the door off. Yeah. And they used all the rest of the dynamite they had. So the thing goes off and it just blows the car to smithereens. The Dobie dollars shoot through the wood walls. They found a diamond stud earring stuck in the far wall from where the safe was. They said it looked like a giant sieve by the time they were done. The explosion was heard all the way back in Willcox, and for the next few days afterwards, the miners and people would go out around the train site and go looking for these silver Dobie dollars because they'd blown everywhere. They found them up to a quarter mile away. So yeah, it's but they actually burned up some of the money when they did it, but Wells Fargo never said what they got away with. There are different estimates on it. One fun part. The fireman who was there at the scene called the explosion a highly artistic performance. So yeah, what they had done, and there was some debate about how they got onto the train. They pretty sure they got, you know, what they called the blind baggage. Usually you had the engine, you had a coal car, and then you had the express car. And in between there was no window on the side of the express car, so you could climb up in there and just sit there. And it was really a place where a lot of the hobos and stuff would wait so they get a free ride on the train, because rarely fixed it. Well, when the fireman went through, he saw these two guys in there and told them to get off the train, and they said no. And so he went back and got the engineer and the conductor and came back with two other guys, and the guys come up with guns. And they take them all back to the cab, they get the conductor to cut the train behind the express car and run it out from Willcox. That was story number one. Story number two is they got on the blind baggage, nobody saw them, and once the train started, they just climbed over the tender into the cab. And the engineer was like, oh wow, who's this guy? You know, so, but there's some debate about which one actually happened. The newspapers that reported it varied on the actual story. So, the express messenger, when they stopped the train, the express messenger, George W. Mitchell, he had actually been robbed 4 months early on a different train. And when they made this unscheduled stop in the middle of the desert, he kind of looked out and he saw these cowboys getting out with the engineer and conductor guys. There's a robbery going on because there's something really wrong here. And he realized half of the train was missing too. So he took all the valuables he could get out of the safe, bagged them up, threw them out, and then crawled out this other side of the express car after locking the door. So they think people would think bandits would think he was still in there. So the bandits get up there and they bang on the door and nobody answers. Finally they get the firemen to go get an axe and they chop the lock off the door. That's how they got into it. And then of course, big explosion. Mitchell starts walking back to Willcox. He's actually the first alert that something has gone wrong and that the train has been robbed. The bandits took all the currency that was available. Estimates are between $40,000 and $75,000, which would have been a fortune back then. However, Wells Fargo, anytime their trains got robbed, refused to say how much was taken. They never disclosed it, so it's still a mystery. And Camillus Fly, who was a famous tombstone photographer, and you've probably seen pictures of his famous Geronimo pictures. This is 1903 version of one of their trains, so it's a little after this. And there's the depot at Willcox where they probably got them. Okay, here's Camillus Sidney Buck Fly, and he's a famous photographer. That's his wife Molly there. That's in their studio. He was most famously known as a photographer. He took the pictures of John Heath after he got hanged. He took the pictures of the famous picture of the three guys in a casket after the OK Corral shooting. He shot Geronimo while he was still in the field, and he had the meeting with General Crook. He was fairly famous. Well, he decided to run for sheriff, and he was fairly well liked. He actually got the position, and so when the word gets back to Willcox, he's located in Tombstone, so they have to ride out to Tombstone to tell him that this has happened, or telegraph to Tombstone. And so he immediately puts a posse together and goes after the bandits. The bandits, after they do the robbery, they go directly to the Chiricahua Mountains. Chiricahua Mountains are also known as Cochise's stronghold. Cochise and the Apache, the Chiricahua, would go there every time between raids because it was so inaccessible. You don't want to go into the Chiricahua Mountains unless you have a good map. There's also a lot of twists and turns as you go through it, and one guy with a Winchester can hold off an entire posse. So the posses would actually follow them to the Chiricahuas, but would not venture up into them to chase these guys. So, however, so they go up there. They run into the Chiricahuas. Fly follows them, and they try. And once they get there, he's like, "Okay, we're not going in." He goes, "What we'll do is we'll put people in all the roads coming out, and we'll catch them when they come last a few days. We don't know how much provisions they have, but they're eventually gonna have to come out to get food. So he's sort of surrounded. The other thing is because they had only hit the express car, which is considered local, it becomes the jurisdiction of the Cochise County Sheriff. Had they messed with the males, it would have been a federal crime, and they would have sent the U.S. Marshals after them. The U.S. Marshals were a little bit, could get away with a lot more than the sheriffs could. They would hunt people down and they'd kill them. And that happens a lot in some of the other robberies. Well, within 24 hours, they actually identified the two bandits. It takes that long. Funny thing is Camillus Fly, of course, was a photographer. He had taken a picture of this young cowboy in all his gear called Grant Wheeler. Grant Wheeler, and I'll get a picture of him in a second. And Grant Wheeler looks like he's all the cowboy. He's got the hat, he's got the gun, he's just all proud. The other, Grant Wheeler had been hanging out with Joe Black, or Joe George, who they call Black George. Black George is a rough character, and we'll get to that in a second. They interviewed the crew, and they actually, because these guys robbed a train in their backyard, they were both Cochise County cowboys. Grant Wheeler was well known for riding broncos and wrestling steers and everything else. He won awards for it. And all of a sudden, he just decides to go into train robbery. So, yeah, and so, let's see. Funny thing is the reason they knew it is because right the day before the robbery, he goes into Willcox and buys a whole bunch of dynamite. So, yeah, we're not talking a couple of geniuses here, okay? So it was thought, they thought the bandits might head to Old Mexico, except Grant Wheeler had this aversion to Mexico. He hated it, and he would not go. And so they decided, okay, he's not gonna go there, but we gotta figure out where he is gonna go. If he's not gonna go there, maybe he'll head to Tucson or north to Phoenix and try to get lost in crowds in those big cities. Okay, so Joe George was rumored to come from the Arizona Territory from Oklahoma about a year and a half prior to the robbery. He never made a confidant of anyone, so nobody's really sure where he came from. He stood about 5'9" weighed about 140 pounds, had a dark complexion, and almost a cadaverous look. That's an actual direct quote. His age is estimated to be about 30. He's missing his index finger on his right hand, and from the use of his language, it's declared he has some education. He goes around constantly armed and prepared for trouble, and even when working around the campfire, he wears his cartridge belt and pistol. Now, we're used to seeing the movies where everybody's always got a gun on. And by Arizona, by this time, it was illegal to carry a gun in a town, city, or settlement. You could not do it. The territorial law that got passed about 3 years earlier. So all these people, when you see these movies, the guys walking around through the streets of Tombstone and places with their guns on, that wouldn't have happened. You get a fine, you get arrested, you get a fine, and they take your weapon. The fine could be up to $100, which would have been a lot for almost anybody. A lot of guys did, of course, we know a lot of people got shot because a lot of guys just stuck them inside their coats. But yeah, you couldn't wear a gun out in the territory. So for him to walk around with his gun on all the time was really kind of unusual. And also, working cowboys didn't do that. I mean, if you're working, having 5 pounds of Colt on your hip and a cartridge belt on, gets cumbersome, gets in the way. They usually just stash them in their saddlebags. So yeah, he's kind of had a feeling he was kind of a rough character anyway. Grant Wheeler, said the article, is a typical Arizona cowboy, one of the best in the line in the territory. He's been living for some time in San Simeon in Cochise County, about 40 miles east of Willcox. Wheeler was described as being an inch shorter than his compatriot, but weighed in at about 180 pounds. He's also said to be older, about 35 years of age. He was bold and daring to a fault. Those who are intimately acquainted with the man say he will never be taken alive. The Weekly Citizen reminded its readers that Wheeler was the same man who shot Cy Bryant about 3 or 4 months earlier. That was his boss. They had an argument, and he was arguing with some other guy. Bryant came out to stop the argument, and Wheeler shot him. He lived through it, so it wasn't that bad, and Bryant eventually dropped the charges against Wheeler. Okay, here's where it gets interesting. Okay, This is William Milton Billy Breckenridge. He was the Southern Pacific detective. You might recognize his name from the movie Tombstone. He was actually Johnny Behan's deputy during the whole feud that went on down there. A little different from how they portray him in the movie. He was a tough character. He took out a couple of those Cochise County cowboys himself. And after that, he then came up here after he quit doing being Behan's sheriff, and he helped with the survey for the Roosevelt Dam. He's the one who figured out where it was going to go, and where it stands today is because of his survey. He then goes back to law enforcement. He gets hired on as Southern Pacific deputy. He also worked as a U.S. Marshal, deputy marshal for a while. He was in law enforcement for a very, very long time. He wrote a book called El Dorado, which I highly recommend you read. He did not like the herbs. He had really not much nice to say about any of them, or Doc Holliday for that matter. He didn't like the Cowboys much either, but he was pretty upright, upstanding lawman. But yeah, so when you watch the movie and they show him, yeah. But if you get a chance to read El Dorado, it's really quite good. And he talks about this robbery in there. Okay, so another great irony of this story is, told you Camille's Flaw was a photographer. Well, at one point, he took the picture of Grant Wheeler. Grant Wheeler came in his studio, and so once Fly figured out who it was, he sent this photograph out everywhere. This is a newspaper reproduction of the entire photograph here, and that appeared in the newspapers all across the Southwest. Yeah, like I said, we're not dealing with geniuses here. Okay, so the next we hear from the Bandits is a letter sent to the superintendent of the Southern Pacific, a guy named John S. Noble in Tucson. It simply read, in camp, February 2nd, to J.S. Noble, Division Superintendent, Tucson, Arizona. We're comfortably located and all right. Thanks to Wells Fargo and Company for the funds. Signed W.S. and Company, Wheeler. So, yeah. So the guys had a sense of humor at least. So that also got sent all over the place. So they have a sample of his handwriting in case he showed up anyway. So they disappeared for a while. It looks like it's going to be a successful robbery. They went into Cattle Mountains, it disappeared. Nobody's going to go up there and get them, and they figured they'll either go to Mexico or disappear up north. Well, actually, they went east. They went over to on the Arizona side of the national border with New Mexico, to a place called Steins Pass. Steins Pass is pretty much a dying town by then. You can go out there today, there's a small ghost town area there. And even then it was just basically a railroad depot. Well, the train pulls in and these two bandits come out of the brush, hold the train up, cut the train in half, run it out, same scenario once again. And they get it out into the desert, and goes up, and one family who's in the cab says, okay, let's go back to the express car. And the engineer goes, you don't have the express car. He's like, what? He goes, you got the baggage car. The express car is the one you left back there.
Oops.
Okay, so this is mildly funny. I'm going to quote it right from the paper. Reported by the Arizona Republican, the robber was evidently a man who does not speak hastily. His words were chosen with care and precision. He naturally remained in silence and meditation, running through his vocabulary to find something to match the situation's warmth and color. And when he did open his mouth to talk, he was fully prepared. Engineer Burke said the language was awful to hear and thoroughly demoralizing. He damned everything about the Southern Pacific system, from Mr. Huntington to the section hands. Every foot of road was cursed from San Francisco to New Orleans, and he wandered off on some branch lines. The bridges of rolling stock were touched with weird profanity. The longer he swore, the more eloquent, blasphemous he became. Until Mr. Burke got to thinking that an actual train robbery was a religious rite in comparison to this kind of profanity. The robber wound up by cursing himself and his associates, and there seemed nothing else to swear about without falling into the reprehensible habit of reiteration. The robbers then mounted their horses, which were hitched nearby, and rode off. Some of the old newspaper articles are so funny. Anyway, okay, so they were not really sure, but it was assumed because of the exact same way they did it, exact same way they did Willcox, it was probably Grant and Wheeler. Wheeler and George. Okay. Okay, so 3 weeks later, Detective Breckenridge gets put on the trail, and there's the Chiricahua Mountains. And, there's more to that. That's why it's important. Okay, so they also put a John S. Thacker on the case. Wells Fargo did, and Southern Pacific put Billy Breckenridge on it. Thacker was mostly famous for catching the black bart in California. However, after that, he pretty much became kind of a slacker. He was famous, and in his book, Breckenridge said, yeah, he basically just stayed around hotels and ate out at restaurants and ran up a bill. He spent almost no time in the field whatsoever. Yeah, he didn't like him either. Let's see. So, well, Breckenridge is a little bit better of a detective, and he gets a clue that leads him up to Durango, saying that Wheeler is in Durango, Colorado. He's gone north, Breckenridge heads up there. When he gets to La Plata County, Colorado, he gets a deputy sheriff to go with him, a guy named Joe Smith. So these guys, I mean, did they have original names back then? Joe Smith. Anyway, starting at Durango, they traveled by buggy to Farmington, down in New Mexico, and then track the outlaws back to the town of Cortez in Montezuma, Colorado. There they lose the trail. Breckenridge decides to go back to Durango and they're traveling in a buggy, they're not on horseback, they're actually in a little wagon, and leaving Deputy Smith in Cortez. But while he's en route to Durango, Breckenridge, outside the town of Mancos, he gets a positive identification on Wheeler from a local farmer. He stopped at the guy's house to water his horse. In fact, the young kid who saw him said he was really mean to his horse, and that's why he kind of stood out to her. So Breckenridge sends a delivery man back to Cortez for Deputy Smith. Deputy Smith's already heard the news, and he's on his way, so they meet about halfway. So Smith gets to Breckenridge and Mancos, and they speak to local law enforcement. The deputy said, when the deputy is there, says, yeah, he met Wheeler earlier in the day. He'd seen the horse out in the pasture and went out to investigate, and there was this guy sleeping on top of a haystack. It was Wheeler. And so he shows him, yeah, that's the guy. And got a picture of the guy. He says, okay, well, how about this? And what we'll do is we'll go to the hotel, we'll get a window overlooking that pasture, and we see him get up in the morning, because we don't want to go over there at night because we don't know exactly where he is and we don't want to scare him. We'll go over there first thing in the morning at first light. And they all agree to this, so they get a hotel room that has a view of the pasture, and they can actually see him up on top of it. They can see him on top of the haystack. Well, let's see here. When Breckenridge tells the story, if you ever read El Dorado, there's a couple breaks in the narrative that are kind of strange, but I mean, the guy was writing it was in the 60s and it happened like 30 years earlier. So, okay. According to Breckenridge, they see Wheeler get up in the morning, and he goes out, saddles his horse, and starts preparing to leave. And so they panic. They're like, we gotta get to it. So he sends Smith over to get the two deputy sheriffs, and he goes down. They saddle their horses, and they go riding out to the pasture. Wheeler, in the meantime, goes to the pasture, goes down into a gully, a wash, what we call a wash, and you can see white smoke coming up. He's cooking his breakfast. He has no idea what's in store for him. So they come out of deputies, the alarmans move up closer. They call on him, and right as they get there, he comes up out of the arroyo. And they tell him to halt. He pulls his pistol, takes a shot at him. Then he drops back down into the arroyo, and they hear another shot. And they're like, okay, this is going to be hard because we can't really get to the arroyo without, it's open field. And we can't get to the arroyo without him seeing us and shooting us. So, they're like trying to figure out what to do. There's no movement, everything's quiet, and they just figure he's just waiting down there for them. So finally, one of the deputies says, okay, what I'll do, I'll get the fastest horse we have, I'll ride by as quickly as I can. He probably won't be able to get a good shot at me. So that's exactly what he did. And as he rides by, he looks into the gully, and there's Wheeler. He's lying next to his campfire, and he's not moving. So he drives back by, still not moving, and goes back to the guys, and they all proceed up to the gully and go into it. Wheeler, the second shot, went right into his head. He killed himself. And so they take the body, and typically back then, when somebody got killed, no matter who it was, the first thing they did was assemble a coroner's jury. Now, the coroner's jury, their only thing they have to do is determine how the person died. They can make a recommendation to the local justice of the peace if somebody should be arrested, but their only concern is how they died. Well, pretty obvious how he died. He has a gun in his hand and a bullet hole in his head. So they determined it's a suicide, and they buried him right here in Mancos. The grave has unfortunately been lost. I went up looking for it at one point, and yeah, they said they probably never even put a headstone up for him. They probably just threw him in the ground. Yeah. So what was really odd about the court, because they cataloged everything the person has on him, and what they found when they were going through his pockets, he had less than $1 in his pocket. He didn't have any money. So where'd the money go? Okay, a couple theories about this. Meanwhile, well, let's go back to Joe George, or Black George as they call him. Black George disappears. He completely vanishes. Nobody knows what happened to him. There's rumors. Billy Beckenridge said at one point he got a clue that said he was further up in Colorado, or maybe gone to Utah where he had family, and he was gonna head up there, but Southern Pacific said, yeah, we really don't care. And so he let the clue go. He'd actually been having, before they did the robbery, George had been in a hospital in Tucson, and he had sent a couple letters back and forth to this address up in Utah. And so they figured it was probably his sister that was up there. He probably went there. But nobody knows. Let's see here. Marshall Trimble, the Arizona State historian, he says he believes that Joe George went down to Mexico, got himself in a gunfight, and got himself killed. There's no evidence of this. There's no paper trail for it. There's no newspaper article about it. Just basically, if it happened, it was never recorded. Who's the other one? Okay. Hold on, sorry. Okay, Ben Trawick, who is the tombstone historian, also said that George gets killed, but he unfortunately gives no details either. I have searched all over for it. I have never been able to find it. So I'm taking it out with a grain of salt. My guess is that, well, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so according to Trawick, though, here comes the treasure story. Sorry, I forget this is here. According to Ben Trawick, there's Stein's, beautiful Stein's Pass, New Mexico. This is Cortez, much nicer place. And there's Mancos. And like I said, I did actually visit the cemetery there. I can find anything. Okay. Okay, this is the Dos Cabezas Mountains, located where they think George and Wheeler got to. Ben Trawick had a story when he wrote about it. He unfortunately never gave a citation for it. He had heard a story that some guys were up there prospecting, and they came to a cave, and inside the cave were 2 saddles and a whole bunch of slid open Wells Fargo bags. And he said he thought that when they ran up there, they went into the cave and lived there for a while, and basically then when they left, they just took their money, left their saddles, and disappeared. Well, you know what happened to Wheeler. And okay, one problem with this is that going through these mountains, which are really rough, you would not want to be carrying a saddle. It's heavy. if you're gonna desert your horse, you're gonna desert the saddle too, you wouldn't care. I mean, it's not a place you take a horse, and why would you carry your saddle if you're not gonna get your horse back anyway? So, I take a little bit of, I question this really sincerely. I think it's just one of those tall tales, but people have been going up into those mountains for years looking for the treasure, and they still go up there today, assuming it's up there. Okay, so what really happened? We don't know. We don't know what happened to the money. My best guess is that Joe George was probably a really much rougher character than Wheeler was. And after the Steins passed Robbery, he turned on Wheeler, said, "You go your way, you get to keep your life, and I'm keeping the money." And they split parted ways. That would be my best guess is what happened. That's why the money has never been found. It's because Wheeler took it, or George took it, and Wheeler ended up with less than $1 in his pants pocket and sleeping on a haystack. So anyway, but if you ever want to, feel free, get a map, go look for it. It's up to you. It may be up there. I wouldn't guarantee it though. Yeah.
What's it near? Where are they near?
They're actually near the Dos Cabezas Mountains. It's two peaks in the Chiricahua, near the Chiricahua. It's down in Cochise County. And oddly enough, after I worked when I first got out of library school, I worked at the state prison down in Tucson. And one of the inmates I met there, Billy Hummel, who actually was related to the Hummel family. He'd been on America's Most Wanted and everything else. He was a professional bank robber. And when I mean professional, he did this from the end of the Korean War up until the 1980s when he finally got caught after appearing on America's Most Wanted. So, amusing tie-in story here is he loved the Old West, and when he was younger, he called himself Billy the Kid. When they first caught him, he was actually dressed in full-on Western gear. He just had this fascination with it. So when he finally gets caught, they gave him basically 40 years for two bank robberies. And as I met him, he was just into his 80s, but he had a ranch out near the Chiricahua Mountains. And one day, the FBI came swarming his ranch, and he, like all the outlaws of old, ran for the Chiricahuas and came out the other side and disappeared. So this is a fun tie-in. Anyway, so that's pretty much the story of Grant Wheeler, Joe George, and the Willcox robbery. They did say when they brought the car through Yuma, taking it back to California, like people were just amazed because basically there's barely running on the trucks, and they're just like, how could anybody destroy this thing? But they did. They said it looked like a big sieve. And if you want to maybe find a couple Dovey dollars, you may want to go outside down near the train tracks in Willcox with the metal detector. You might find something. Anyway, that's the story. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned that on occasions there, those guys were on the train at the train station. In the movies, they're always riding horses and jumping on the train.
Yeah.
That means being on the train. Preferred way to get on the train?
There was the two most popular ways. First, there's two robberies near Colossal Cave down here on this very same line. The first two train robberies in Arizona. They were pulled off by the state. What they did was they put stuff on the tracks, so they derailed the train. And they pull out one of the ties, stick it up under one of the rails, so the rail was up like this. Train would go over it, flip. The first time they saw it before it happened, the second time they actually flipped the train. It went down into the water. So they thought they killed the engineer and the conductor and everybody else. Turned out they were all fine, but that's the way they did it. Eventually, it was the outlaw Sam Bass who improved by just getting on the train at the station. And they just get on, and then they get out a few miles, they either climb over the tender and have the engineer stop it, or they would just do it right there at the train station. Hold their guns and say, uncouple it unless they. So that was a preferred method. Like I said, Woodson Brothers actually did get on the train in Maricopa as on its way to Phoenix, and they actually pulled their guns. That's the only time that ever happened. Every other time they just went for the express car. So, but yeah, also riding alongside a train on a horse and trying to jump on it, really cool stunt, I gotta say. Having done stunt work, that's really fun, you know, love to have been able to do that. But yeah, that was just way too dangerous. You just, and plus most of the time, the horse wouldn't outrun the train, it's when it's at full steam. So, but it does look really cool in the movies. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you know if the Pinkertons were ever brought into this?
Usually the Pinkertons are pretty much operated back east. Southern Pacific basically has its own detective agency, as did Wells Fargo, and they pretty much use their own. The Pinkertons, you find them a lot in the back east robberies with Jesse James and stuff like that, and a little earlier when they were hiring outside detective agencies. But as these railroad corporations got bigger, they would have their own branch of security that they would pay to get there. So. And any other questions? Oh, that was entertaining. Yes, sir.
And my daughter just moved to Mancos, Colorado,
Oh, yeah?
and, who did you say, might have been buried there, but they couldn't find any evidence?
Grant Wheeler.
Grant Wheeler.
Yeah, there's no headstone, and that's pretty much what you go by. I mean, you could probably go through there with a metal detector and find one that, you know, I'm assuming they took his gun belt and stuff, but you probably get some record if you went in. They might even have a pauper cemetery part of the section. I unfortunately, the office was closed, so I couldn't find out where that was. But I walked through that cemetery fairly extensively, and I couldn't find anything. So it's but it's usually, if you know, and that was commonplace. If you go down, you know, any of the cemeteries around here, if somebody was too poor, and the county buried them, they usually would not give them a headstone.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell her about it, maybe she'll.
Yeah, actually, you can find out where the pauper section is. He's probably in there.
Yeah.
He didn't even have no money to get himself buried. So. There we go.
Your photograph of Memphis is about twice as big as the town is today.
Yeah, it's a pretty small town. So yeah, it's all, Willcox is also, Willcox is about the same way. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Willcox?
By
Yeah,
Hayden?
yeah.
By Hayden?
It's down by Tombstone in the Cochise County. It's basically one street where they have like everything. And then if you go back behind this street, right up next to the train, it's called Railroad Avenue. And right up next to the train station, you have all these really wonderful buildings. But if you go back into the town any further, you just see all these empty storefronts. And a lot of that is because of basically the highway kind of circumvent.
David, looking at that, and
Yeah.
my daughter's from Memphis also.
Oh, okay.
There must have been a hell of a fire there, because none of that's there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, over the years, they demolished a lot of it too. I mean, you know, Payson has done that also. We used to have the wonderful two-story Victorian hotel here, I think it might be. But a lot of that stuff got demolished over the years when they put in the 7-Elevens and Circle K's. But, yeah, it's, yes, sir.
So any speculation as to whether there were other people involved? Because if you're riding a train out with two guys, who's bringing the horses to carry this stuff out?
They actually usually would park the horses in advance
Okay.
where they knew they were gonna stop. And so the horses were already tied up waiting for them, so. They did, at first they thought there was 4 guys who robbed it, and they gave the names of the 2 others, but they both proved alibis. And so, and then of course, once they found out that Grant Wheeler had bought all the dynamite the day before, they pretty much knew who it was. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Well, we didn't talk about it today, but, you said there were about 14 train robberies. How does that compare with any stagecoach robbery?
Stagecoach was a much easier thing to hit.
Yeah.
Stagecoach robbery was a big thing. I think there's close to 200 of them in Arizona from the time before the stagecoaches stopped running. Pearl Harbor, of course, being the most famous one. Still a famous female bandit. She robbed the 1-year globe. But yeah, their train robbery was real compared to. Well, another thing, stagecoach robbery was basically if you got caught doing it, you got caught for armed robbery, you might do about 5 years. Train robbery, for some weird reason, and probably from pressure from the railroad corporation, train robbery became a capital offense. You could get hanged for it. In fact, there's a guy in our cemetery named Frank Armour who committed the first train robbery after they passed that act, the legislature passed that act. And when he got caught, they were going to try it as a capital offense. He had a guy he was working with named Franz Torin. Franz Torin, you love this, was a professional piano player. We got a dumb cowboy and a professional piano player. So, so they get caught within 24 hours of trying to rob the train. They don't even bring dynamite to bring below the safe. It's really bad. So, when Frank Armour goes to trial, he decides to plead out. He pleads to robbery, which gets him out of the train robbery, so he doesn't get hanged. He still gets 30 years in the territorial prison. He doesn't last it. He ends up getting tuberculosis, and his brother Bud Armour, who was the Armour family who's been lawmen in Gila County forever. Bud Armour was one of the first. He was a deputy sheriff. When Frank got out, he came down here. He bought him some land. But they let him do ranching. He didn't even last 6 months. Tuberculosis killed him. So, yeah. So that's kind of a roundabout way to get to your question. Yeah, Franz Torin, however, decided to plead guilty. Just notice. And they did try him for train robbery. They did sentence him to die. It was only by because they finally appealed to the governor, and the governor's like, it's a property crime. We're not gonna hang a guy for a property crime. The jury didn't even want to convict him of it because if they convicted him, automatically it was a hanging offense. But they said it's a property crime. Nobody got hurt. They didn't kill anybody. You know, they still sent him up for 4 years. When he got out, he went and joined the U.S. Army, fought in the Philippines, and fought World War I. Lived to a ripe old age, into his 70s. Wife, several children. He still has family around. So yeah, he actually did. One of the few who did really well for himself afterwards. So, any other questions? Well, okay, now I have a guest speaker here. From the Questers, and they're going to speak about this, what we're trying to put together here. They're trying to start a Questers chapter here in Payson. They're a nationwide organization. They're kind of like the Antiques Roadshow, but they don't buy and sell anything. It's just a way for people to come, bring their antiques, bring their things they want to talk about, and share them with other people. So, without further ado,
wow, David's presentation was my first chance to hear. Wonderful. Before I get into the Questers, I want to ask, is anybody in the room a collector of anything? We collect things. Okay, anybody else? Okay. You know what they say, if you have two of anything, you're a collector.
A collector. Are you a collector?
So, be honest. If you collect.
Kind of.
Okay. Well, most of the members of Questers are collectors, and they collect everything conceivable. Anything from, antiques and fine art, to shop glasses and pest dispensers and just, matchbook, anything is collectible. We enjoy collecting, and we enjoy learning about the items that we collect. Our mission is supporting preservation, restoration, and education about anything of historical significance. And we have so much fun doing it, we really do. We get together, we have meetings monthly, we share our keepsakes, the stories of the keepsakes, if it's handed down, the story of when and how it was acquired, or a lot of people have collected things that they aren't sure why it was made, where it came from, so a lot of the educational side of it comes in too. We also have a lot of people who don't collect. They just love history. So I'm thinking here, I'm gonna talk about questers to a group of people who are our kind of people, because I assume you're here because you love history. So we have 20 chapters in Arizona. We have about 250 members, and we have 6,500 members across the USA and Canada. About 800 chapters, and we've been around since 1944. So we just celebrated our 70th anniversary, and we were started by this little lady. I believe she was working in some War Department office, and she was a collector, only she collected tea caddies, you know, the little secure boxes that people kept tea in when it was valuable. And she went out on her lunch hour and was shopping and saw this little syrup pitcher in a store window. And she knew it was old and she just had to have it. Collectors, you know what that's like when you see it. You have to have it. She had to have it. So she took it back to where she worked and put it on her desk, and people were going by and they got, what is this? Well, she kind of knew what it was, and so they started talking about it. And pretty soon other people started bringing in treasures and keepsakes and things and telling the story about how they got it and where it came from and that kind of thing. And they kept doing it and thought, well, this is silly. We just need to set a program and maybe do it weekly, monthly, and that's how it started out back in 1944. And it's developed into what it is today. We also, part of the preservation and restoration part of it, we have scholarships for graduate students through Columbia University and Winterthur, I never pronounce it right, Winterthur, whatever it is. And most of our chapters have what we call a preservation and restoration project. We work with historical societies, museums, libraries, schools, anything that needs help. We've had projects from saving buildings to saving a piece of an ephemera that's an important historical document. And if they need cases, I've got some displays back there, and one of them has some of our museums that we're doing for. A quick example, my chapter, it's Fort Peace, it's in Fountain Hills area. We decided that we were gonna save a TB cabin. And when they first brought that up, I thought, why would you wanna save a tuberculosis cabin? What, at the end of the 1800s, first the 1900s, people came to Arizona because they had tuberculosis, lung ailments. And they had these sanitariums, they called it, but they were a bunch of tents with a building in the middle with the kitchen. So people, they found out they couldn't use the tents because the bacteria, they couldn't get rid of the bacteria, so they built these little cabins. It's at the Cave Creek Museum, and it's the last remaining TB cabin in Arizona, and it was listing to one side. So we got it fixed. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. And again, why it's important, some of the people that came to Arizona were members of the Franklin Wright family, the Goldwater family, the Babcock family. I mean, these are people that stayed and developed the whole area, developed Arizona. So a lot of our chapters work directly with museums in their areas, and usually the museums are in historic homes, so they'll find replacement furniture, chandeliers, fix the roof, whatever. So that's basically what we're about, and we'd love to start a chapter here. You all have some historic places too, the jail, I believe there's a couple of buildings on Main Street, one that's actually on the National Register of Historic Places. Zane Gray's Cabin, the Payson Historical Society. So anyway, and by the way, we have gentlemen and ladies members. We'd love to have our gentlemen members too. I think about 6 or 8 of our chapters have men members too. So please think about it. If you're interested or like more information, there's a couple of displays back there. One of them is our Keepsakes Roadshow, which David mentioned. We invite people to bring their items, either to share the story or to find out more about it. Obviously, if we have antique dealers, we have what we call almost experts. So when people have things like they don't know the history of it, we can help them find out what it's about. And they're a lot of fun too. So. And there's other information on the table. I'd like to introduce a couple of other people. I said we have antique dealers. We have a member of our Hayden's Ferry chapter. Come on, you have to stand up. This is Rhonda Petty, and she's also the owner of the Little Red Barn Antique Company here in Payson.
Oh, good.
In Pine, I'm sorry, in Pine. I just, Strawberry Pine Payson, they're the room. So. And then I didn't know she's coming, our first vice president, our state first vice president.
Oh, great.
Yes, what a big surprise, thank you for coming. I'm president, Arizona State president, so we're very excited, and we hope, if you're interested, leave your email address and we'll send you more information. We'll probably have another event, maybe a Keepsakes Roadshow or a speaker. We usually have somebody make presentations or speakers. Somebody caliber of name here, I don't know. We have statewide meetings twice a year, and we have an international conference once a year. The last one was in San Diego, and the next one's in Nashville, Tennessee. So anyway, Robin Moore, and I should have you stand up and say hello. She's our incoming president. So please, if you have more questions, ask me or the other 2 ladies, and I'm done.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really cool organization. When I heard about it, they were doing their first meeting here, I attended it. Unfortunately, I have to work for a living, so I only have to speak for part of it, but it was for one of the first time they did it, and so they really started, what is it, 6 people started a chapter?
Yeah, all we need is 6.
Yeah, so if you have some interest in it, check out the literature and see what it's about. It's really cool. Because I'd really like to start a chapter because I have really cool stuff at home.
Not himself.
Yeah.
So when you buy one.
And I got this guy.
Oh.
This is my first antique.
I get old.
Well, anyway, thank you all for coming, and I said, feel free to check that out, turn on the light so you can see it.